I'm going to press play now, and we are recording. So once again, my name is Darian Lehman, Director of Reclaiming the Narrative at WXIR Community Radio and RCTV, presenting the 2021 Winter Offerings in the Grassroots Journalism Workshop Series. And to kick us off this year, we have Mary Lawrence, contributor to Reclaiming the Narrative and co-host of Evidence of Design, a public affairs talk show on WXIR, and we're super excited to participate in her interactive workshop on media literacy part 1, which is going to focus on resources for reading news critically. The part 2 of that workshop is Tuesday, January 26th. That's in 2 weeks. And then next week on Wednesday, January 20th, I will be offering a workshop called Live Streaming as Reporting. And finally, on Wednesday, February 3rd, offering a workshop on producing radio news reports. So I hope that you all will consider joining us for any and all of those. And I guess that's all I have by way of kind of introducing the series. And I will now turn it over to Mary Lawrence, and she'll direct us in a round of more thorough introductions. Thanks, Mary, for preparing this today.
Yeah, thanks, Darian. It's a great intro, and I'm glad to be heading off our grassroots workshop series for the year. Very exciting. This workshop is actually something that came into our minds almost a year ago, and then the pandemic happened and it kind of got pushed to the back burner. So I'm really glad that we're finally here, even though it's via Zoom and not all together. I have an introduction, a little bit about myself in the presentation, but as Darian said, I'm also a contributor to Reclaiming the Narrative occasionally, and I'm a co-host of another radio show on WXIR, Evidence of Design, and I'm sure that our guest Jason will talk a little bit about that. So I want to welcome you all today, and I would love to hear from each of you just a little bit about yourself from today's workshop. So
Mary, we lost
Jason,
a little bit we lost the second half of your prompt. I think you were asking us who we are and why we are here at the workshop.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe I should switch back to my other internet real fast. I don't know which one's better, honestly. But thanks for letting me know. So yes, just a little bit about yourself. What brought you here today and what you hope to take away from this workshop. Yeah, and I will start with, I'll call on Jason, and perhaps you can each call on the next person until we make sure that everyone has introduced themselves.
Sure, thanks, Mary. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Taylor. I'm at the great pleasure to help out with Evidence of Design, as Mary mentioned, and also Reclaim the Narrative, WXIR. Just a big fan of grassroots radio and journalism and organizing, so just a privilege to be a part of the team. I can't think of a more pertinent topic nowadays well, there's many pertinent topics, but among the many, media literacy is one of them. And so I'm just here because I want to learn more about media literacy, and I hope to be a better consumer and producer of media that is, helpful to the public interest. So with that, I'll pass it to my next screen on the right, which is Abby.
Hi, my name is Abby. I am mostly an arts reporter at this point, but I dabbled in news. Just like Jason said, I feel like it's very important right now with everything, and having internet be my main source of news consumption, to kind of be a little bit more aware of how to read it. And as somebody who does journalism myself, just kind of seeing the signs and and making sure that I guess my work is up to par. So I just want to learn a little bit more from those. You know, Mary, you've been part of evidence design, which kind of deals more with more of that hard news. So I'm excited to learn from you. So I'll pass this on to Peggy.
Hi, I'm Peggy Thomas. I'm a writer. I write nonfiction books for children. And I guess I just want to learn more about, for my own personal sake, about, you know, navigating the media, but also things that I can pass on to kids through my writing or through school visits and that sort of things. I think that's really important right now.
Awesome.
And let's see, is Vanessa there?
Yes, I am. Okay, so I'm Vanessa. I hope y'all can hear me. I'm in the lunchroom. It's a little loud. So I'm Vanessa. I was co-host with Darian for maybe 9 months to a year, Darian, on Reclaiming the Narrative weekly radio show. And I am here today because I just want to continue learning. I'm a late starter and really just graduated from Brockport a few years ago, and I'm just trying to just be a sponge and try to learn everything I can, especially because right now I'm kind of a one-trick pony, as Darian knows. But I'm just trying to learn everything I can, and I hope that I can catch a little bit of this. But please, Darian, make sure I am able to see it because I will have to dip out in a little bit. Thank you. I'm sorry, I was supposed to throw it to somebody, right? Okay, is that Katira?
Let's see. Katira, are you there?
Hello.
Hi. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yes, my name's Katira Poland. I'm the CEO of Love for Words, which is an editing boutique. I'm also an author myself, and I wanted to take the class just to learn how to distinguish, you know, between what is accurate and what's not inaccurate, and just have a better read of what's coming through, you know, my social media feeds, because that is how I consume most of my news. So I did it for personal reasons, but I'm sure some of what I learned can also be applied in working with authors and writing. I write nonfiction, so I'm sure there'll be some overlap there as well.
Awesome. Thank you. So I hope this won't be too entry level for everyone, but I guess we will go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for introducing yourself. Throughout this workshop, it's maybe not as interactive as it would have been in person, but I would love for everyone to especially use the chat function. Does everyone know how to do that? You should find it on the bottom of the screen. Awesome. We're several months into the pandemic, so I guess everyone's used Zoom at least a few times. So yeah, I would ask you to use the chat function primarily just so we don't have people talking over each other, but we will have points where we're a pretty small group, so it probably will be fine to just turn on your mic and talk. But let me go ahead and share my screen here. And let's see. Alrighty, so you should all be able to see my screen. Is that the case?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so welcome again. This is Media Literacy Part 1. So today we'll be mostly talking about resources for reading news critically, and primarily it'll be about news online. This, as Darian mentioned, is presented in partnership. So I am representing the radio show Evidence of Design. and Darian is representing Reclaiming the Narrative. Here's an overview of what we're going to be covering today. So we already did our introductions in general. Then we'll be kind of spending the first half of the hour, or I guess we have an hour and a half, on media literacy, and the news landscape in general. So kind of looking at how people receive their news and what that means for how we're consuming it. And then the second part will be more the workshop. So I have an article that we'll be using as an example, and we'll kind of go through all these steps of what to look for within a news article online, and how you can figure out whether something is real or not. And, there are a lot of steps of deciding whether or not it's reliable or even real. And then we'll wrap up. We should have some time at the end for any questions you may have. Just a disclaimer, I'm also learning, so I may not have all the answers, and none of us do. So it's very likely that someone will ask a question that I won't know the answer to, and it'll just be something that we can all learn from, so we'll find out. A little bit about myself. I never wear my hair down anymore because I don't want to catch COVID germs at work. So here's a photo of me wearing the same sweater I have on now. I graduated in 2015 with a bachelor's degree in French and German. Language has always been something that really interests me. And at the end of my time at Nazareth College, I decided to write my honors thesis on language manipulation. And that has kind of continued into the interests that I have continued with. I lived abroad for a couple years and was teaching English, and I focused a lot on media literacy at that time as well. And I actually started on Evidence of Design as a guest, talking about media literacy, and then I've, stayed for the last 2 years. And I wanted to pull this quote I have from Hannah Arendt. So this is a quote that I actually used in my thesis 5 years ago, because I thought it was an interesting thing to share. So what convinces masses are not facts, and not even invented facts, but only the consistency of the system of which they are presumably part. And I thought that was really interesting because it reminds us that you are not necessarily going to believe something based on the facts themselves. You're more likely to agree with something that aligns with your values at like if you're looking at it at face value, even if there isn't appropriate research to back it up. So that's something that we can keep in mind throughout this, and also as we are going through the media literacy landscape in the future. So I'd like to start off, and here I'll ask you to use the chat function of asking what is media in general. So I'll give you, what media is. It's defined as the main means of mass communication that deliver information. So let's use the chat function, and I'll give you a couple minutes. So let's just think of some examples of media in general. All right, this is media right now. All right, so it looks like most people have had a chance to respond. So TV, magazines, radio, newspaper, social media, internet, radio, cave drawings. I don't know if that counts as mass communication. Facebook, Twitter, newspapers, recording current events, social media, newspapers, podcasts. All right, yeah, those are all phenomenal answers. And again, I'm sure that you are all familiar. So here's a couple images that might bring media to mind. So some of the examples that I had pulled off are, the internet, that far left. We have social media, news, video games even. Jason, I know that'll be something that you'll like, and communication technology in general. Then we have publishing, and two people in the audience obviously will be very familiar with those: books, newspapers, periodicals, or magazines, and then broadcasting. So our organization is radio and partners with a TV organization. So all of these are different kinds of media. But what is media literacy? So the National Organization for Media Literacy Education, which is a phenomenal resource, by the way, and I'll give you a link at the very end of the presentation. Media literacy is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. So all of those things that we looked at in the last slide, it's not just about knowing what they are, but then how to use them and how to share them. We're going to be focusing just on one of these parts today, and that is analyzing. So we're going to be looking at a headline and each part of an article. We're going to be analyzing it and deciding whether we can trust it or not. So let's talk about why media literacy is important. The first fact that I have here might blow your mind a little bit. Media literacy is important because from this 2018 Nielsen study, the average adult in the US interacts with some kind of media for almost 11 hours every single day. And this is pre-pandemic. The internet and our 24/7 news cycle allows information to travel really quickly. And it also means that our demand for information is much stronger. So because there's so much information all the time, we expect that there's going to be information available very quickly for everything that's happening. So some people might take shortcuts because of that. And it means that both real and false information can travel very quickly. And there are some studies out there that say that false information actually can travel faster because of the rate at which people share it. All of this communication is constructed with a purpose and a point of view. And media literacy will help us see what the person's motive is behind this communication. So why did they share the information that they're sharing, and what is the point of view or the perspective that they're sharing from? And in general, these are just some general ways that media literacy is helpful. Can help you discern truth from falsehood, fact from opinion, journalism from propaganda, and propaganda is what we'll be focusing on specifically in the next workshop. Media literacy can help protect you from being taken advantage of, falling victim to fake news, or just being lazy and sharing something without actually looking into it. Here we've got some consequences for poor media literacy skills. And I'm sure that some of you have heard of these. Anyone heard of Pizzagate? If you want to turn your mic on and tell us a little bit about Pizzagate.
I can only offer that I've had pizza from that pizza shop and it's really good. And I didn't see any signs or symptoms or like any signs that it was a place where there was children being smuggled through. So good pizza. No evidence of smuggling. That's all I got to offer.
Yeah, so they do have pretty nice pizza. It's a little overpriced. But a few years ago, there was a conspiracy theory around this pizza shop outside of Washington, D.C. that several prominent Democrats were... Oh, thank you, Vanessa. Sorry you have to leave, but we'll miss you. Thanks for coming by for a little bit. Okay. Sorry, so the pizza shop, there was a conspiracy theory that this pizza shop was hosting a child pornography ring that was led by prominent Democrats. And this conspiracy theory, you can see here that someone was taking the symbology of the restaurant's name and trying to connect it to other symbols. this was false, but this conspiracy theory was spread so much that someone, a man actually went to investigate, went to Washington, D.C., and ended up shooting off his rifle inside the pizza shop. I don't think anyone was hurt, but he probably could have done a little research and just found out that that wasn't actually true before he went. Another example is one that we all saw this past week. So obviously these are Trump supporters at the Capitol who were all led to believe that the most recent election was false, and that Joe Biden wasn't actually elected president. So they stormed the Capitol trying to, stop the leaders of our nation from confirming Joe Biden before he's inaugurated this coming week. So these are just some examples. Obviously, most false information won't lead to this kind of violence, but it can happen. And so being wary of things all the time, or at least most of the time, is really beneficial, especially if we're sharing information on the internet. So let's talk about news. This is a little bit about how we get our news. So we have a chart here. So this is from a Pew Research Center study that was published in 2019 about how Americans get their news most frequently. And you can see a lot of people get their news from television, so different kinds of networks. And then we have news websites. So those are probably more official news. But if you look down, more people started getting their news from social media. So about 1/5 of adults in the United States get their news from social media most of the time. Obviously, social media sites aren't vetted as news sources, so that doesn't necessarily mean that that news is correct. And being a news site doesn't always mean it's correct either. We have this other study, so this was published more recently in July of 2020, and this focuses specifically on where US adults get their political news. And it found that, again, almost 20% of Americans get their political news through social media. We also have a large chunk of TV, and then news websites and apps is about 1/4. But I found it interesting how many people are getting their information from social media and from the internet in general. So that's what we're focusing on today. At this point, let's talk a little bit about misinformation and disinformation. Can maybe raise your hand if you've heard these terms before. Yeah, so they float around all the time, and they are distinct from each other. It's not always necessary to distinguish them, but sometimes it is. And so I do want to spend a little moment talking about each of them individually, because misleading information isn't always shared on purpose. And so misinformation and disinformation might crop up in different areas, and it is important to be aware of both of them. So misinformation is false information that is shared in ignorance. So the person who's sharing it generally doesn't know that it's false. They haven't done their due diligence of looking into it. And so this can be tricky to spot sometimes because it might be coming from a source that you trust otherwise, a friend or a family member. And this, for me, is going back to that Hannah Arendt quote from the beginning, where if you are seeing something that you agree with, you may be less likely to look into it, and that could be you then sharing that misinformation. So it's pretty easy to fall prey to, especially if you trust the person coming from. Disinformation, I think, is what people more often think of when they think of misleading information. So this is information spread with the intention of misleading the person who's reading it. People might do this for different reasons, and we'll talk about motivations in the next slide. So it could be financial or political gain, or social or psychological reasons. Let's see. So I have this chart here. This is from the News Literacy Project. Oh, I got a chat. Okay, yeah, so Jason says, I find this distinction important, although sometimes hard to prove, and that is a good point. So that's why we're going to be talking about some motivations in general, or more specifically, why people are going to be sharing misinformation or disinformation. So this is from the News Literacy Project, which is another good resource, and I'll also put their website at the very end of the presentation. So on the left, oh, I think I have a pointer here. Oh yeah. So on the left here, you can see that there are different groups. So we have a group of self-interest, group interest, altruistic, and malicious. So these are the kinds of people who are sharing information. And then we have examples of each of those groups. So yeah, for self-interest, those would be scams, clickbait farming companies. For group interest, we have partisans, governments, and candidates. Altruistic are ordinary people, and malicious, trolls, extremists, conspiracy theorists. So the kind of people who are in those examples that I shared at the beginning. So I'll ask you again to use the chat or maybe just turn on your mic here. So what I want you to think about is why each of these groups would be sharing misinformation. So let's look first at the self-interest groups. We have scams, so those might be emails that are coming out or different things, clickbait, and companies. What would be their primary motivation?
Selling more products.
Yeah, absolutely. Selling money. So these people, oh, I have too many things on my screen. They are in it for the money. So clickbait, you know, they want you to click on their story because it will get them ad revenue. Companies want to sell more products, and scams are generally looking for an easy buck. So they want you to give up your money, and they want to have that money for themselves. Our next group has partisans, governments, or candidates. And those are just some examples of people who might be in it for group interest. What do you think that this group? All right, so we've got advantage, support, power, leverage, public opinion, votes. Yeah, so these are people who are in it for your support. They might be sharing false information about another candidate, or doesn't necessarily need to be false, may just be misleading information to get you to support them, get you to vote for them. We see that all the time. Then we have ordinary people, the altruistic group. What do you think that these people might be sharing misinformation or disinformation for? Actually, with this one, I'll also ask, do you think that this group would be sharing misinformation or disinformation? All right, empathy, to make themselves feel good. All right, so the main goal for these, oh, I already did both, whoops, would generally be to help others. So yeah, part of why people share misinformation, but generally it's because they think that the information is going to help someone else because maybe it helped them. And yeah, I think Jason mentioned that they would more likely be sharing misinformation because if you want to be helping someone else, you probably wouldn't be sharing false information or misleading information on purpose. You would be doing it by accident. Whereas, you know, people who have their self-interest or group interest, or the next example, who are just out for chaos, those people would more likely be sharing disinformation. There certainly could be misinformation that they're sharing not on purpose, but if they are looking for a specific purpose that is going to give them an advantage and gain something for them, they're more likely to share misleading information on purpose. All right, so what does this mean for us as consumers? If we're looking at all these different motivations and possible barriers to factual information, then we need to be aware of what those motivations are, because that's going to allow us to get past the barriers and find out what the facts are so that we can form our own opinion. So in this next section, we're going to look at some specific tactics. So those are those 5 things I had on the overview slide. And we're going to go through an article that is a real article that I saw on my social media feed. And we're going to break it down and look at different parts of it and decide, whether it's something we can trust or not, and why or why not. I haven't talked this long in a while. Forget how dry your throat gets. So the headline is the first part, generally the first thing that you'll see. So it's the first opportunity for a writer or whoever's posting it, a company, to use manipulative language that could kind of snag your attention or change your mind for something. Generally, a well-articulated headline, so the opposite of what we're going to be looking at, will give you a general idea of what the article or post or image contains, so that you shouldn't be surprised when you end up actually looking at the article and seeing what's in there. Not well-articulated headlines don't do this. So we'll see a few different examples of what those could be. So what we want to look for are really 4 things. I have 3 lines, but it's really 4 things. We want to look for strong wording, words that might make you feel a certain way, or just generally things that elicit violence or anger or something that's just very strong. We also want to look for what their purpose might be. So when we look at a headline, we want to ask ourselves, like, what does this make me want to think, or what does this want to make me think? We also want to look out for cliffhanger style headlines. These are headlines that won't actually tell you, like specifically won't tell you what they're going to be talking about. And then the last thing is looking for an emotional reaction. So if you feel really angry or really sad when you read the headline, you want to check yourself and ask, is it the language of the headline that's making me feel this way, or is it the content? Because obviously, if you're reading about a massacre or something, the content is going to make you sad. But if you're reading about, the sandwich someone ate for breakfast and it's making you angry, it's probably the language about the sandwich that's making you angry. So I have an example of each of these. I think someone just wrote something in the chat. Yeah, cliffhanger headlines are certainly a sign of clickbait, actually. So here I have an example, and these are all from a right-leaning website. So for strong wording, Nancy Pelosi in 60 Minutes interview slams Trump as deranged, calls for prosecution. So here we have like a really violent image of slam. And they could have certainly said this differently. So like in the 60 Minutes interview, Nancy Pelosi describes, or there are other words that aren't as violent. So this is something that should jump out at us. Using this one as an example, what do you think the purpose, what do you think that this article might try to lead you to believe? Or do you think maybe, is this pro-Trump or anti-Trump? Maybe that's a simpler way. Yeah, so this is something would it's definitely pro-Trump because it's suggesting that Nancy Pelosi slamming Trump would be a really bad thing, suggesting that she is being too heavy-handed, that maybe she's overstepping her boundaries, wants to associate violence with Pelosi, so that when we think of Nancy Pelosi, we think of someone who is violent against the president. And if we support the president, then that would not be something that we would want to read or want to read and feel really angry. All right. Then we have cliffhanger style headlines. As Jason mentioned in the chat, made him think of clickbait. These often are related to clickbait articles. So here we have this example from the same, this is from the same website. Goes all over the place, you know. So this wildly popular dieting fad could be dangerous. Doesn't tell you what the wildly popular dieting fad is. And here we actually also see strong language again in wildly popular. So we want to find out what it is. It's, you know, maybe going to be very exciting, maybe something we'd want to try, or maybe not because it says it could be dangerous. But we want to find out what it is. And so therefore we're going to click on it. So this is probably someone who's looking for maybe some ad revenue. All right, and then an emotional reaction. So here we have Capitol protests from the reporter's notebook from abroad. Capitol assault felt like another 9/11. So this is drawing a relationship that puts the Capitol assault and 9/11 on equal ground, which obviously 9/11 was something that was very emotional for a lot of people and for good reason. So putting the Capitol assault on the same ground would cause us to put those on the same level and maybe not think any further and just say, oh, this is a tragedy, let's move on. Let's get stronger together without actually critically looking at it. Any questions on those so far? All right. All right, so let's take a look at the headline for the article that we're going to be exploring for the next half hour or so. All right. Nurse in perfect health found dead after getting a COVID-19 vaccine. So let's take a few minutes, and maybe this is a point where we can use just audio. What elements do you see in this headline? You're welcome to use the chat or audio, whichever you prefer, but just take a minute and take a look at it.
It's portraying shock.
Shock, so an emotional reaction.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Darian says cliffhanger. Why do you say cliffhanger, Darian?
Because it implies a connection between the vaccine and her death despite perfect health, and you want to find out, is there a connection? Was there a connection? What's the connection?
All right. All right, so we already see some emotional reaction, cliffhanger. What do we think the purpose is of this? And maybe it's something that Darian already mentioned. Want to sow fear?
Alarm.
Alarm?
Question the vaccine.
Yeah, so it'll make us question the vaccine. It'll make us maybe assume that the death is because of the vaccine. And it definitely makes us want to click on it and find out more. So let's go ahead and take a look. The next part is going to be the platform. So once we've gotten our eye caught by the headline, really either one of these could come first. But we want to take a look at where the information is coming from. So first off, what platform are you actually on? And then what platform is the news article on? Because those might not be the same. So reporting will always have a bias, no matter how much they say they're objective. Even someone who claims to be objective has a bias, and generally it's better to be upfront about it so that the reader can expect it and just know what they're getting into. So someone, even if they're showing both sides. They're still choosing what stories they're going to publish and whose perspectives they're going to highlight. Are they talking to people on the ground? Are they talking only to representatives? These are things that can tell us just what their bias is. And it may not be a negative thing. A bias is just how they're presenting the information. So we want to ask ourselves who the audience is, and then how the person who's sharing or publishing wants that information to be read. So we want to look for the platform. Again, we want to see, where did we see this information in the first place? And then where is the information from? We want to look at the type of media. So that's more, you know, is this social media? Am I looking at a news media website? Did I see this on TV? Although we're not really getting into that now. And then the last thing is maybe something we wouldn't think of all the time, but that's to look into the ownership or the funding of the platform. So who started it? Has anyone bought it? What is the, you know, what's the general bias of the person who owns it? Because ultimately, you know, in the United States, and in capitalism in general, the people who have the money have the power in what is said. And so if the owner doesn't like a certain point of view, they probably won't want people publishing that view on their website if they have a heavy hand in it. So that could be something that would point to some information. So this is the original post that I saw of, you know, that headline that we just looked at. Can anyone recognize the website? So not the website that's listed, but can anyone recognize what social media website I found this on? Yes, so this was on Facebook. I was just scrolling through. Actually, I went and looked. I was trying to find an article that we could use for this. So I was looking for something that might be misleading, and this was the first one I found. And it seemed a little sketchy. You know, someone found dead after getting the vaccine, doesn't say how, doesn't say why, you know. So I wanted to look more into it. So that's what we're going to do. So I did find it on Facebook. And I went to, you know, followed the link and went to the website, which, as you can see, is called Tweaktown. I don't have it up here. I just have screenshots for each of these because it's a little simpler than going to the website and navigating right now. So here we have a little bit more. So we have the headline, the subheading, then the author, when it's published, looks like it was updated. And then the first part of the article. Something I didn't include on here, but probably should have, were all of the advertisements that were surrounding this part of the article, because that's also something that we want to look out for. It is pretty normal for any kind of website now to have advertisements somewhere. Most likely they're going to be, you know, along the side. This one had advertisements on the sides, in the middle of the article, all over the place, which can suggest that this is more of a clickbait site. They're in it for the ad revenue because you're going to be seeing many, many more ads. So that is something also to look for. But here's the general idea. Oh, and we can look at the top here. We have science, space, health, and robotics. So this isn't a platform that is specializing in health news. It's part of a larger section. All right, so to find a little bit more information about this site, I went to the About page, and this is the beginning of the About page. It's a letter written by the founder about why he started this page. Does this look like a news website? No, it definitely doesn't look like a news website. Which is because it's not, but they have some news. So that's kind of weird, and maybe we should be a little skeptical of what we're going to read on this website. So let's go farther. So take a look here. These are, as you can see, not from the actual Tweak 10 website. I decided that I was going to try and find out who owns this website, what kind of website it is. So two things I want you to look for on this are who owns it and what is the goal of this company. So you can use the chat and let me know what you find. All right. So yeah, the founder is Cameron Wilmot. So he was the person in the previous page who wrote that letter about starting Tweaktown. And we can see here that it is actually its own company, which is nice to know. It's not going to be on the whims of a larger company, but it is its own company. And it's okay. Cameron Wilmot's still part of the ownership. And then we see on this next page that this is a for-profit company. And that can mean a lot of things. You know, most businesses are for-profit in some way. Might be the ad revenue. It might be that they sell some stuff. I didn't look that far. But it is a company that is in the business of making money. So that means that things that we're clicking on may be used in some way for the company to make money. We don't know that for sure, or but you know, that is what they are motivated by. So the next thing we're going to want to look at is the author. And we got a sneak peek of the author earlier on, but we'll look a little bit more closely at him. So one thing to keep in mind is that legitimate news sources will always credit the writer or the author directly, or photographer. And they'll usually provide a link to the other work, even if they're not a staff writer. But something that we're not going to be exploring specifically here, and that I will probably talk about more in the next workshop, is that content isn't always created by a human. They can be shared by artificial intelligence, and this happens even in major newsrooms. So some of you may have heard of bots that kind of spew out random, you know, tweets or advertisements especially. But even like the Washington Post has an artificial intelligence technology that it uses to report minor information. You know, they argue that it allows the journalists to focus on other things, and that's something we could certainly dispute or not. But there is artificial intelligence used to share information. So if you can't find an author, what you can do instead is look into the organization instead. You can find out that information of what kind of an organization is it? Is it for profit? Why is it sharing this kind of information? And the credentials of the organization itself. Luckily, we do have an author here, so that's what we'll be looking into. So we are going to want to look at the name and the biographical information, other works by that author, and again, one can look into artificial intelligence technology, and we'll talk more about that next time. So here's our author. This is his contact page. So we can see here, looks like a real person. You know, it's certainly possible that he's not, but here we have his name, his title, news reporter and hardware editor, which is an interesting combination. The location, we have an email address and a Twitter. So if we wanted to, I didn't do that here, but we could certainly go to his Twitter and see what kind of interactions he's had with other people. Or we could even email him and see what happens. But, you know, those are some extra steps if you want to get really into it. And then down here we have his biography. So when we're looking at that, does anyone see any kind of journalism credentials? What credentials does he have for talking about news or talking on this website? Yeah, he's got gaming experience. So it looks like he has a lot of interest and maybe some background in gaming, which is really cool, but it has nothing to do with healthcare or vaccines or people dying. So this is another clue that this piece of news might not be the most reliable. When we look down too, we see his editorial responsibilities. Those include news, streaming devices, gaming headsets, and gaming microphones. I mean, it's possible that this guy has some crazy background in journalism that he didn't mention and is also really good at these things, but most likely he's someone who's more interested in gaming and video games and is doing news on the side because this company just wants to do it as an offering for some reason. So here are some of his pieces of content. As you can see, so this is where I just scrolled down to look at his offerings. He has written 4,985 pieces of content for this site. And this list here is just some of the content that was already published in January 2021. And I have had this on the slide for at least 5 days. If anyone, I mean, I think all of you are actual writers, you know that that's a lot of content to put out in a very short period of time. Does anyone spot any of those headline tidbits that we thought of earlier here? Any cliffhangers or really strong language?
This is the dumb reason. Seems a little bit intense for a news hook.
Yeah, there are tons of cliffhangers, lots of strong language. See, everyone can do this at home to see if their face mask is working. What can you do? You have to click on it. Ambulances won't take near-death patients into hospital in this state. Won't tell you what state it is. So these are very obviously all headlines that want you to click on them. And when you do click on them, they're very short. So they're mostly just used for clickbait to bring you to the page and look at whatever advertisements are there, or to bring you to the page in general. So looking at their source, yeah, sounds like someone is making money off clicks. I mean, I hope they are, but if that's what they're in it for, because I clicked on a lot of things on their site, so hopefully that helps. So yeah, we want to think about where this information is coming from. So we see from the headline that the nurse died after getting the vaccine, and that's certainly, there's not a lot of information in the actual article. We'll look at it in a second. So we want to find out what are the sources. We'll look at some of the sources the author provides, and we can even cross-reference with other sources. This can be as simple as Googling, like copying the headline, pasting it into Google and pressing go, and just seeing what comes up. This is something I've done in the past, and if you don't find the information anywhere, you know, there was one specific article that a relative of mine shared. I copied the headline or the keywords from it, Googled it, and it was literally nowhere else. So she obviously didn't cross-reference, and it was something that just hadn't happened. Turned out later it was actually from a satire site. So it, you know, but she thought it was real, which is not great. So some things we want to look for when we're thinking about the source are quotations in the article. So not only do we want to see that there are quotations And there certainly don't have to be for good journalism, although I think it generally contains it. So we don't necessarily just want to look at whether there are quotations, but we also want to see who those quotations are from. So who is the author quoting, and how much of the quote they're actually using. So quotes are other things that we can cross-reference, especially if it's a relatively popular topic. If you paste the quotation and the source that you're looking at only has fractions of it, that's more likely that the author is going to be twisting the words or embedding their own meaning into the words. Whereas if they have a full quote, like say the quote's 3 sentences long, and they have the whole thing in there, they're not embedding their own ideas. They're letting you, or more likely letting you, decide on your own after reading the words themselves. Then we're going to want to look for embedded links. So these are generally links that we can follow to go and get the information ourselves from the other source, which is one method of cross-referencing. On the other hand, people can list their sources at the end. So even if they don't embed them in their article, they may list them at the end. This article actually did both of those things. So this is the entire article. So we clicked on it and it's 2 paragraphs long. Let's start by looking for some quotations. Maybe this is hard to use for the chat. So someone want to turn their microphone on and tell me who and where the first quotation is?
Perfect health.
Yep, Perfect Health. And that one is not, it doesn't say who it's from. So we have no idea who they're quoting. What's the next one? So the next one's a 2-parter.
It's her father.
Yeah, it is.
And a person. And a big IPO.
Yeah, so we have the quote from her father that she was well and happy and that she never drank alcohol, etc. And then we have the IPO, and I do not speak Portuguese, but that is the place where she worked. So this is a little bit more of a reliable quote. And all they're saying is the explanation of the cause of death will follow the usual procedures in these circumstances. So the reliable source doesn't actually tell us how she died. And then at the very bottom, so there's the first and second quotes. At the very bottom, we have an embedded link, which will lead us to, or presumably will lead us to the source. And when we scroll down, we also have the news source at the very bottom of the article. And so that brings us to the web page where the information is from. So let's go to that web page. All right. So we didn't talk about date, but here we have the date, and the article that we just looked at was from a day after. It was from January 5th. So this is where they got their information, and there's only one source. They're not quoting multiple things. They just have this one source that they're quoting. And let's take a look at this headline really quick. So health authorities on alert after nurse dies, all caps, following vaccination with Pfizer's COVID-19 shot in Portugal. Does that sound like a really reliable headline? Yeah, not particularly. It's also, it's not, maybe not as bad as the last one, but it draws the same parallels. It seems to also make us want to think that she dies because of the vaccine. But if we scroll down here, we see an update. So this is an update from January 5th, which is when the other article was published. And this says specifically that the nurse's death has not been linked to her taking the vaccine. And I have looked at the original article. There hasn't been any update. So someone may be led to believe that there is a, some sort of parallel between getting the vaccine and dying, when all this article says is that there isn't any information that that's the case. So we've, at this point, in case there weren't enough clues ahead of time, we can decide now that this is not true and, probably not worth our time. Do you have any questions at this point? No. Okay.
Mary, I mean, this is phenomenal. Like, it ticks off every box of like you finding this on someone's social media page that they shared. You like go to the article that's from like some gaming website by this guy who doesn't have media experience, and it's linked to like Russian state media with an update about how there's no connection between what the article suggests to the woman's death. It just like, there's a cacophony of like warning signs flashing here. And I would just imagine like for the average, media consumer, I mean, we have busy lives and there's a lot going on, and like to take the time to figure this stuff out is probably pretty challenging. So I just, I find this stuff interesting and fascinating, but I also fear like how easy it is to fall into these trap holes, and the amount of time and resources we have to not fall prey to this machine of disinformation or misinformation is remarkable.
Yeah, certainly. And this is a real article that someone did share on their social media. I have no idea what kind of information they looked into before they did this, or why they decided to share it, because they also gave no context. But this is something that is real, and this kind of thing happens all the time.
Mary?
Yes.
And one thing I just noticed here, a couple paragraphs down from where you highlighted, the quote from the father is in a tabloid. I assume that's Correo da Manhã, and so it's misspelled. But that suggests that the Tweaktown article is actually 3 steps removed from the original, right? So you get the tabloid, which is reported by RT, which is then reported by Tweaktown. So it's a really impressive wormhole.
Yeah, great catch down there. Actually, I was running through this last night, and the person I was running through with also pointed that out, that it's like this information, it's not even, this quotation also doesn't really say that much. All it says is, I want to know how she died, which Tweaktown didn't take. All it did was describe her. But it's from a tabloid, and that's maybe not the most reliable source of information. And in this case, they also didn't link it. So we don't have the actual article to go and look at. So there's one more element that we want to look at, and those are images or video, which we'll be breaking a little bit away from this particular article that we've been working with. So images or videos can be super powerful and make it easier for us to visualize a story or an article or a piece of news that we're reading. But we do need to be aware of how they can be used to make us think otherwise. So the term that I have here is weaponized content. So these are images or videos that have been taken out of context or are from a previous event. And we have a great example that I'll get to in just a second. So some of the ways that we can look into the images or videos are looking at what date it was used. So this will give us an idea of whether it's from this specific event or a previous event. Then the photo credit, so who took the photo, and that might give you an idea of why that person took it if you know about them or can look into them. And then we have a reverse image search. So we'll do the reverse image search first before we get to the example. And for this, I just took the stock photo that was used on the Tweaktown article. So has anyone, maybe you can raise your hand if you have used a reverse image search before? Okay. So this is something that is super simple to use and takes almost no time. And a lot of different platforms offer it. So you can use it on, like, Google has a reverse image function, Yahoo, Bing, many of the major search engines. Basically, it just sweeps the internet for videos or images that are similar or identical to the one that you're using, and it'll tell you what other websites are using that image. There might be none, so it might be a unique photo, but it might be like a stock photo, as we'll see in a minute, and it might tell you if someone has reposted it on their social media or on another platform, or if it's been used in the past. So one of the examples, or one of the platforms that you can use is this one at the bottom called tineye.com. And I'd never heard of it. I had only used the Google function before. So this is one platform. This is what TinEye looks at. It's very easy to use. As you can see on the left here, you can either upload the photo, so you can save it to your computer, or and then upload it, or you can just right click, say copy photo, and then paste it into the URL, or paste it into the search bar and see what comes up. So that's what I did here. As we can see, this is a stock photo, so I expected that there would be a lot of hits. It is indeed a stock photo, and then we have, you know, some examples. Oh, sorry, my little bar is covering up the bottom. So yeah, it's just a stock photo, and we can see some of the places that it was used. And a solid example that we had was actually one that Darian suggested to me. I don't know if anyone knows Gino Finelli from the city newspaper, but he took this video during the Black Lives Matter protests in Rochester this summer. You can see there are people standing on a roof, and I don't have the video to actually play, but this is what someone might see when they're scrolling through their social media, is a clip like this, and they'll be like, what's going on? So a troll on the internet, someone who is sharing information most likely to cause chaos, wrote, "Black Lives Matter activists are now climbing onto people's homes in Rochester." What kind of a reaction do you think that people seeing this might have if they didn't know to look into it?
They're reckless.
Yeah, there may be criminals, there might be racist responses, and I'm sure that there were. People might be scared. They'd be like, oh, I want these protests to end, because people are climbing onto houses. So it could have a lot of fear or angry reactions. And then we have this second tweet by Gino Finelli himself, who took the video to say, hey, I took this video, this is wrong. The people came out to show their support. So this is one example of weaponized content. So this photo, or this video actually, was being used against the actual situation from which it was used. It was meant to support. And I saw someone I should try on the photo of the reporter. That's a really good idea. I can find out if he's an actual troll. So maybe we'll do that afterwards. So that's all for content. So we have a little bit of time left, and I would love to hear from everyone. Maybe we could go around. You can take a few minutes to think, but what's something that you're taking away today that was new, or how might these tools help you in the future as you're navigating media? So for this, you can just turn your mic on if you'd like.
Why, I'm kind of curious to use the reverse image thing. I've never done that before. So that'll be great because sometimes I have to do photo research for some of the books that I use or I write. And just overall, this was just a good reminder of all the things that to be looking out for. It's amazing.
I actually, when I was looking for the video in the last slide for that example, we had it in my, I wrote an article for Reclaiming the Narrative using these, like on how to use these steps. And I just reverse image searched the image that we had on there to find the examples in the last one. So it was really quick, very easy to use. Let's see.
And just to note, I put that article, a link to that article that Mary wrote, really kind of a summary of what she's presented today with some examples. I put that in the chat box.
Thanks, Darian.
Mary, I guess I'll jump in and say, you know, when Americans used to get most of their news from established gatekeepers, such as the New York Times, or, you know, when there was one or two nightly news programs, there certainly was still the need for media literacy, and there still certainly was the presence of media bias. I guess what I'm particularly struck by the strategies that you've shared is the importance of using these when it comes to social media use. You know, the example you brought up was used through social media. I happen to personally not use social media, so I sort of have more control, I guess, over where I get my news from, because I'm physically entering in URLs to go to websites that I sort of have trust with, you know. Whereas if you're on social media, you're being fed news and information via an algorithm or via advertisements or via other people's sharing of things to you, you know, so you're like in less control of what's in front of your face. And so I'm just struck by, like, for those who are on social media frequently, or for those who really get their news from social media, that the skills and strategies you presented here today are more important than ever, if not more important, as compared to those who might just go to like NewYorkTimes.com and call it a day with their news.
Yeah, that's a great point, that it's a little bit more passive. You have to be aware of what you're looking at.
I know for me, I mean, I do, especially having been part of Reclaiming the Narrative, I learned a lot more of news reading from that, but it can be daunting being a consumer, and I feel like this made it a little bit more clear, even though, you know, certain things might stick out at me where I'm like, okay, I know that's crap, and like, I'm not even gonna give that the time of day. Sometimes it can be a little more stealthy, and I think that this really gave me a good basis to kind of go off of, and you know, it made it, instead of something that's daunting, something that's like exciting on my own, like journalist development, to kind of recognize these things. And it's really something that I think that, you know, the average person that's on social media can really benefit from. So thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I would just echo what you know, Jason and Abby have both said, especially, you know, the importance of this as it pertains to social media. But I guess I would also add that I think even if we're talking about, you know, the 90s and Dan Rather is the one guy that, you know, is on the nightly news, I think these strategies still apply for kind of vetting the sources, right? Like if we're being sold a war abroad, and the only people they have on to talk about the importance of that war abroad are military leaders, right? Well, maybe there's some other people who have differing perspectives, right? So maybe there's something they're trying to sell us on here, right? So I think I think all that stuff actually still is very useful when it comes to conventional media as well, and even from our kind of trusted sources, right? As you said, Mary, all media has a bias, whether it's explicit or not. So I appreciated all those tips.
Thanks, Darian. Anyone is also, welcome to shout out any questions or comments or write them in the chat. But I wanted to share here, there's a couple of the sources that I used. So the National Association for Media Literacy Education is one. They have a lot of really wonderful sources. So I'll put these in the chat in just a second too. So if you want to copy them. And then the News Literacy Project is one that I just recently discovered. And I have their website here as well. So I'll stop sharing and I'll put these in the chat. And I'm all done unless anyone has any other questions or comments, but I really, really appreciate everyone coming tonight. And the next time we'll be talking about propaganda techniques and how to spot them. So I hope that you'll come then too.
Mary, what was the resource that you used to look up Tweaktown and who owned it?
Oh, I will have to go back to that slide.
Okay. In the meantime, I'll just put in a link to some of our other offerings in this workshop series in the chat if people want to check that out.
Yeah, and I'm just throwing in the NAMLI and the News Literacy Project while I'm still on that slide. So those are in the chat. And let me see if I can find that other one. So there weren't a lot of options, but this isn't a very popular website, so there weren't a lot of places to find. The first place I looked was just the website's own About Me page. And then I had the Everybody Wiki and Crunchbase. And I don't think that either of these are necessarily, I mean, I wasn't familiar with either of them, so I didn't have a lot of time to vet them. And that's why I looked in multiple places to see. But I always start with the general, who do they say they are, and then see who other people say they are.
This was great, Mary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm glad you could come.
Yeah, me too.
And don't forget, in 2 weeks, Mary will do part 2 on propaganda techniques, and I think that will be especially interesting. Mary, can you give us a little preview? You're going to break down kind of logical fallacies and some of the arguments that are used.
Yeah, so one of the things I want to look at more into is, so I talked a little bit about bots and stuff today and AI, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the more workshop-y part will be actually looking and finding for, there are all these different techniques that people use to twist their language. So these are the more subtle things that people might use, not just in the headline, but in the article itself. Things like name calling or, making things sound better than they are. There are several different lists of propaganda techniques that you can find online. And so we're going to be looking at, I think, about 10 of them and looking at examples so that when we're reading, we can find those in the text that we're reading.
Great.
Hear someone
All right.
Right.
Anything else from any of the participants? All right, Mary, thanks so much again. Thank you all for coming. We're going to close out our workshop for this evening, and we hope to see you at the next ones.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Darian.
All right, good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.